The Mr. Men Library.
Come on, let's go there. It's a mystery trip. Mr. Trains on Mr. Tracks.
Stories written by Roger Hargreaves and his son Adam Hargreaves. Audiobooks narrated by Samuel Dudley, aka Uncle Mammy.
It really is a pantomime.
Mr. No. Mr. No lived up to his name. It was not unusual for him to say no. In fact, he could not say yes. Little Miss Yes also lived up to her name. She said yes to everything. In fact, she could not say no. One fine day, Mr. No met Little Miss Yes. As Mr. No could not say yes, and as Little Miss Yes could not say no, they said, "Hello, mister." "Hello, little miss." "Would you like to come and have tea in my home?" said Little Miss Yes. "No," said Mr. No. He continued on his walk, but it made him sad. Along the way, he met Mr. Happy. "Hello, are you not having a happy day?" asked Mr. Happy. "No," answered Mr. No, and it was the truth. "You'll be happy one day," declared Mr. Happy as he walked away. "No," replied Mr. No, even though he hoped to be wrong. A short time later, Mr. No met Mr. Tickle. "It's a nice day for a tickle," he said. "No," replied Mr. No. "I'll be on my way then," sighed Mr. Tickle. "No," said Mr. No. Can you guess what happened next? Yes, that's right. Tickle, tickle, tickle. But that's no fun, protested Mr. Tickle. "Does my tickling make you laugh?" "No," confessed Mr. No, and it was the truth. Mr. Tickle went to find somebody else to tickle. Mr. No found himself lonely and unhappy. Just then, Little Miss Fun passed by. "Hello, Mr. No," she said. "You might know I love dancing. Will you give me a little dance?" "No," replied Mr. No. But Mr. No regretted his answer. He regretted it immediately. Why? Well, because Little Miss Fun went on her way, and once again Mr. No found himself lonely and unhappy. Suddenly, he had an idea. If you want to know what it was, turn the page. He went to buy something in town. Then he went to visit Little Miss Yes. "You again!" she exclaimed with a big smile. "No," he replied without a smile. "So, am I dreaming?" she asked. "No," he replied. "Well, if I'm not dreaming, come on in." "No," he replied, turning half round. And guess what he was holding behind his back for Little Miss Yes? Flowers! Beautiful flowers! "No, I won't give the flowers to Little Miss Yes," thought Mr. No. But he gave them to Little Miss Yes anyway. "You are nice," she said. "No," he said. "Yes, yes, come in for tea," she insisted. "No," he repeated. "In that case, shall we meet up again tomorrow?" she suggested. And Mr. No said, "No, we shall have tea now."
Go to Mr. Land, the land of magic. Come on and see Mr. Fields and Mr. Trees, Mr. Birds and Mr. Bees, Mr. See all the Mr. Men, the men who live there. It's Mr. Time. It really is a pantomime.
Mr. Crosspatch. In your opinion, why is Mr. Crosspatch's house like this? Well, it's because Mr. Crosspatch fights with it when he has nobody else to fight with. It's no wonder he is always bruised like this, is it? One day, Mr. Crosspatch said to the 4 daisies, "I'm tired of fighting with anyone and anything. I promise, I swear, I'm finished. Starting today, I'm not going to be involved in the slightest little fight." The 4 daisies smiled. They had a hard time believing it. A worm who lived in Mr. Crosspatch's garden appeared. "What are we looking for today?" he asked with a sneer. "Chestnuts or chestnuts?" "One more word and I'll wring your neck," shouted Mr. Crosspatch. He clenched his fists, but he had no time to fight with the worm. Cautiously, the worm vanished on the ground. Then Mr. Crosspatch bumped into Mr. Strong. "Calm down! No fighting today!" he said out loud. "Let me carry your basket!" "That's nice of you, but I'm afraid you're not tough enough," replied Mr. Strong. "Me? Not tough enough?" shouted Mr. Crosspatch. "We'll see about that!" And he clenched his fists, and he waved, and he rushed towards Mr. Strong. "Ouch! Ouch! Ouch!" Little Miss Careful passed by. "You must be more careful," she said to Mr. Crosspatch, holding out her hand to help him recover. "What business of it is yours?" he yelled. And he stood up on his own, and he clenched his fists, and he waved and ran. Straight into a tree! Well, a gentleman does not fight with the ladies. "Ouch!" shouted Mr. Crosspatch. "Ouch!" shouted Wilfred the Wizard, who fell out of the tree. Then the magician said, "Mr. Crosspatch, you'll be in trouble if you continue to fight everything like that." "But it's stronger than me," moaned Mr. Crosspatch. "Abracadabra," said Wilfred the Wizard. What do you think he did next? No, he didn't magic Mr. Crosspatch's fists into toffees or rotten tomatoes. Instead, he whispered, "Follow my good advice. Turn your tongue 7 times in your mouth instead of yelling, and cross your hands behind your back instead of hitting the first thing you see." Mr. Dizzy arrived at that very moment. "There's no risk of a fight with him," murmured Mr. Crosspatch. "Very good," said Wilfred the Wizard. "Hello, elephants!" cried Mr. Dizzy. "Look at my beautiful blue ball. I'll put it in the tree for you to admire." And he placed it on the ground. "But your ball isn't blue, it is green," said Mr. Crosspatch. "No, it's blue," yelled Mr. Dizzy. "No, it's green." "No, blue." "No, green." "No, blue." "No, green." "Mr. Crosspatch will see red," thought Wilfred the Wizard. Indeed, Mr. Crosspatch saw red, but he remembered the advice of Wilfred the Wizard. Quickly, he turned his tongue 7 times in his mouth. Quickly, he crossed his hands behind his back. And even more quickly, he gave the ball a masterful kick.
Go to Mr. Land, the land of magic. Come on and see. Mr. Fields and Mr. Trees. Mr. Birds and Mr. Bees. Mr. See all the Mr. Men, the men who live there. It's Mr. Time. It really is a pantomime.
Mr. Cheeky. Mr. Greedy was sitting down at his kitchen table having breakfast. Cornflakes, toast, eggs, butter, marmalade, milk, sugar, more toast, when there was a knock at the door. As he opened it, somebody barged past him. That somebody sat down and poured some of Mr. Greedy's cornflakes into Mr. Greedy's bowl. Mr. Greedy didn't know what to say. The somebody ate the cornflakes. Then the somebody ate the toast, the eggs, the butter, the marmalade, milk and sugar, and got up to go. "Thanks, Tubby," laughed the somebody as he walked out of the door. Mr. Greedy just couldn't believe what had happened. His breakfast, all gone! Now, you would have to agree that somebody who would do that would have to be very cheeky. The cheekiest somebody in the world. Mr. Cheeky. Mr. Cheeky walked down the lane from Mr. Greedy's house with a wide grin on his face. He was enjoying himself, and he continued to enjoy himself for the rest of the day. Further along the lane, Mr. Cheeky met Little Miss Neat, who was painting her fence. "Do you want to do some painting?" asked Little Miss Neat. Mr. Cheeky picked up a spare paintbrush and painted over Little Miss Neat's glasses. "Thanks, Four Eyes," he laughed. Little Miss Neat was lost for words. Just outside town, Mr. Cheeky met Mr. Nosy. Mr. Nosy had hurt the end of his nose. "Could you help me bandage my nose?" he asked. "Do it yourself, Big Nose," laughed Mr. Cheeky. Mr. Nosy was lost for words. Mr. Cheeky walked into town and went into the baker's. He walked straight to the front of the queue. "Excuse me," said Mr. Small, who was next in line. "There's a queue here." "And I'm at the front of it, Shorty," laughed Mr. Cheeky and stuck his tongue out. Mr. Small was lost for words. Mr. Cheeky walked out feeling very pleased with himself. Mr. Muddle asked him for directions to the greengrocer to buy some toothpaste. Mr. Cheeky told him to get lost, and Mr. Muddle never did. That evening, while out for a walk, Little Miss Neat met Mr. Greedy and Mr. Muddle. "Mr. Cheeky needs to be taught a lesson," said Little Miss Neat. "I agree," said Mr. Greedy. "I disagree," said Mr. Muddle, who was as muddled as usual. "And I know just the person to teach him that lesson," said Little Miss Neat. Very early the next morning, Mr. Cheeky was awoken by a knock at the door. It was Little Miss Bossy. "I've come to stay," announced Little Miss Bossy. "But," began Mr. Cheeky. "No buts, and I'd like my breakfast right away," ordered Little Miss Bossy. "Get it yourself," said Mr. Cheeky. "Wrong! Breakfast now, please!" yelled Little Miss Bossy. Mr. Cheeky was lost for words. Mr. Cheeky was so stunned that he actually did as he was told. After breakfast, he decided to go for a walk. He wasn't enjoying Little Miss Bossy's company very much. "Don't forget the washing up!" cried Little Miss Bossy. "Do it yourself," said Mr. Cheeky. "Wrong! Washing up! Now, please!" ordered Little Miss Bossy. Mr. Cheeky washed up. After washing up, Mr. Cheeky tried to creep out through the back door. "Where do you think you're going?" cried Little Miss Bossy. "The lawn needs cutting," she said. "Cut it yourself," said Mr. Cheeky. "Run! Lawn! Cut! Now, please!" ordered Little Miss Bossy. Mr. Cheeky cut the lawn. And so it continued all week long. Every time Mr. Cheeky opened his mouth or tried to sneak away, there was Little Miss Bossy shouting, "Wrong! Wrong! Wrong!" At the end of a very tiring week, it was a very miserable Mr. Cheeky who answered the door when Mr. Greedy and Little Miss Neat visited. It was also a very polite Mr. Cheeky. He made them tea, he offered them biscuits, Mr. Greedy ate 5, and he didn't call Mr. Greedy Tubby, and he didn't call Little Miss Neat Four Eyes. "Well, I think it's worked," announced Little Miss Neat. "He's a changed person," agreed Mr. Greedy. "I think you can go home now, Little Miss Bossy." "That's a shame," she replied. "I was really enjoying myself." Mr. Cheeky showed them to the door. "And remember," said Little Miss Bossy, "any more of your cheek, and I shall be round to stay again." Mr. Cheeky closed the door, and then very softly, under his breath, said, "Bossy boots." The door sprang open. "That's right!" cried Little Miss Bossy, and went home chuckling to herself.
Go to Mr. Land, the land of magic. Come on and see. Mr. Fields and Mr. Trees, Mr. Birds and Mr. Bees, Mr. See all the Mr. Men, the men who live there. It's Mr. Time. It really is a pantomime.
Mr. Stupid. This is Mr. Stupid. Stupid old Stupid. He's the most stupid man in the world. Everybody told him not to go onto the railroad line. But would he listen? Oh no, not stupid old Stupid. He climbed over a fence and slid down the bank and walked along the railroad lines. "Don't be so silly," shouted Mr. Silly. "You'll get bumped," shouted Mr. Bump. "You're stupid very," shouted Mr. Topsy-Turvy. Mr. Stupid just grinned and then slipped. He banged his head on the railway line, hard, just as an express train was coming towards him at 100 miles an hour. "Quick!" shouted Mr. Happy. "Someone run and fetch Mr. Strong to rescue Mr. Stupid!" And Mr. Strong came and pulled Mr. Stupid off the line just before the train reached him. "People who play on railway lines," said Mr. Strong, "are very, very, very stupid people." "Phew," said Mr. Stupid. "Well, I promise never to play on the railway lines ever again." And he never did, and now he's not nearly so stupid as he used to be. Not at all. Stay off the line and stay alive.
Go to Mr. Land, the land of magic. Come on and see. Mr. Fields and Mr. Trees, Mr. Birds and Mr. Bees, Mr. See all the Mr. Men, the men who live there. It's Mr. Time. It really is a pantomime.
Walter the Worm. Walter was a worm who lived in a hole, not a damp, muddy sort of a hole, but a warm, cozy sort of a hole. A warm, cozy hole at the bottom of Mr. Happy's garden. Walter was very happy living in his hole, except when the grass was being mown, and when the sprinkler was turned on, and when everyone was playing football in the garden. But on the whole, he was happy in his hole. He had no desire to go anywhere else. He had no desire to travel the world. One morning, not that long ago, Walter's alarm went off, early. Walter rolled out of bed. He brushed his teeth and had breakfast. Yes, worms do have breakfast. The sun was just rising as Walter poked his nose, yes, worms do have noses, out of his hole to see what he could see. It was a beautiful sunny day. Walter decided to go for an early morning walk, or rather, an early morning wiggle. Walter was not the only person who had set their alarm early. The early bird had also got up very early. She had got up early because she was hungry, and she had been taught from a very young age that the early bird gets the worm. The early bird's beady eye had spotted Walter as he left his hole, and Walter had spotted the early bird's shadow crossing the lawn as she swooped down from her nest. "Oh, help!" cried Walter. With an agility that you would never have suspected, Walter dived for his hole. He wriggled as fast as he could wriggle. He wriggled down his hole until a quarter of him was safe. He wriggled until half of him was safe. He wriggled until 3/4 of him was safe. But Walter was a rather long worm. Just as the last little bit of his tail, yes, worms do have tails, was about to reach safely, the early bird caught it. As Walter felt himself being pulled from the hole, he grabbed hold of the end of his bed. The early bird pulled and pulled and pulled, and Walter was stretched and stretched and stretched, until, with a loud snap, like an elastic band, Walter was catapulted out of his hole. "Oh, help!" cried Walter for the second time that morning, as the early bird carried him high into the sky. "Please don't eat me," pleaded Walter. The early bird looked down at Walter as a huge tear rolled down his cheek. Yes, worms do cry. And suddenly the early bird felt sorry for Walter. In fact, she felt so sorry that she had lost her appetite. "Don't worry," she said. "I'll take you home." As she tilted in the sky, they flew over a beach. "What's that?" asked Walter. "That's a beach," replied the early bird. "What's a beach?" asked Walter. The early bird was astonished that Walter had never seen a beach, but it was a very long way to the beach, or at least a very long wriggle for a very small worm. So the early bird flew down and landed on the beach. Walter had a lovely day at the seaside. He and the early bird made a sandcastle, and they ate ice cream, and they went for a swim in the sea, and then as the sun was setting, the early bird took Walter home. Walter made himself supper, and then he went to bed, smiling as he thought about how lucky he had been to meet such a friendly early bird. Before he turned on his light, he was about to set his alarm clock when he had a sudden thought, and he did not set his alarm. He did not set his alarm because he realized that the late worm avoids the early bird.